What's up guys, my name is Dari and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Now that we have talked about how to build queries, we're ready to take another step forward and talk about Eloquent. Eloquent is an ORM, and like I said before, ORM is an object relational mapper, which also means that it's a database abstraction layer that provides a single interface to interact with multiple database types. A single Eloquent class is responsible for not only providing the ability to interact with the table as a whole, but also representing an individual table row. And this might sound pretty difficult. To keep it simple, Eloquent has one primary focus, and that's simplicity. Keep that in mind. Whenever someone asks you, why Eloquent? Just respond with one simple word, simplicity. I can scream that it's simple, but why? Just like the rest of Laravel's framework, it relies on convention over configuration, meaning that it tries to build something with minimal code. I have created a new project called Cars, and I want you to do the same. I want to retake a couple steps that we've done so far. So let's hop to the CLI, and what I want to do is to require Tailwind for our UI. So let's say composer require Laravel-frontend-presets /Tailwind CSS space --dev. Hit enter. This might take a second, so I will pause the video. So let's install npm. So npm install and npm run dev. This might take a second as well. So what's next? We need a controller, a model, and a migration. We could perform them all in one single command, but that's not what I prefer. I usually make my model and migration in one command and my controller in another. So let's say PHP artisan make me a model called car-m, so the dash migration flag. And you can see that our model and migration have been created. So let's create a controller. Let's say PHP artisan make me a controller called cars controller. And I want to add a pretty cool flag that we haven't talked about. And that's the resource flag. So let's say --resource. Whenever you want to create your parts functions, you need to create them manually, right? You need to create a method to show the cars, to update the cars, to delete the cars, and so on. So what we could do is to create them automatically. Let's hit enter. You can see that the controller has been created. Let's hop to Visual Studio Code and let's open our controller. Alright. And as you can see, we have our index, create, store, show, edit, update, and destroy methods. In most cases, Laravel resource routing assigns the correct routes to a controller. Now what we do need to do is to create a route. So let's do that. Let's open routes, web.php. Without the resource flag, we use the route like this, right? Let's get rid of it. What we could do right here is to basically say route, again, double colon. But instead of saying get or something else, we could say resource. The idea behind it is exactly the same. What is our first endpoint? Well, /, comma, what's our controller? Cars controller, double colon, class. Now let's pull in our cars controller. Let's say use app /HTTP /controllers /cars controller. Let's save it. Let's hop to iTerm because I want to show you something pretty cool. Let's write down PHP artisan route list. And what this basically is all our endpoints for the methods that we have in our controller. We have an index, store endpoint, create endpoint, show, update, destroy, and edit. So what we've done inside our web.php is basically saying, well, our first endpoint is the /, and then we want to pull in all the methods that we have in our cars controller. So let's go to our cars controller. Let's scroll up to the index method. Let's return a view to index. You see the difference? We don't need to define every single route in our web.php file. Instead, we've defined them in one single command. So right now, let's open our views. So resources, views. Let's delete the welcome page because we don't need it. Let's create a new folder in here called cars. And inside our cars, let's create a new file called index.blade.php. In our index.blade, let's just write down cars. Oh yeah, and obviously we need to change our endpoint to cars. So /cars. The / was just to show you what the first endpoint could be. Let's go to Chrome, refresh it, and cars have been printed out. Alright. I want to create a UI where we could perform Eloquent stuff. So for that, I obviously need a UI, but I don't want to create anything fancy. At the end of this course, I will add some projects with a way better UI. But for now, let's hop to our Visual Studio Code. Let's create a new directory inside Views called Layouts. Oh, my bad. Let me rename it for a second. And let's add a app.blade.php where we will place our core HTML. So let's write down doc. All right. Let's create a section inside our body. So add yield with the name of content. Let's pull in our Tailwind CSS that we have inside our public directory, CSS app.css. All right. Let me close that off actually because we don't need it. Let's go right below our meta. Let's say link. The href is the asset method, which goes to our public directory. So css /app.css. Save it. And since we have pulled in our Tailwind stuff, let's change the background color of our body. Let's set it equal to a class bg-gradient-2-r from -gray 100 to gray 200. And this won't work for now because we need to go inside our index blade. Let's get rid of cars. Let's extend the layout page. So layouts.app. Let's save it. Let's go to Chrome, refresh the page. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but the background color has changed a little bit. So right now we're able to define our section. So let's say add section, end section. The name of our section is content. Inside our content, we need a div, another div, and an h1. And the text of our h1 is cars. Give it a class of text 5XL, uppercase, and bold. And I won't go in depth about what everything means. Tailwind is very straightforward, and I might create a course later on. So the div that's wrapped around our h1 has a class of text-center, and the entire div has a class of margin-auto, so mauto. Width is 80%, so 4, 5, and the padding y-axis is 24. Save it, go to Chrome, refresh it, and this looks alright. Now let's create the content that will eventually be inside the loop whenever we pull stuff out of our database. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, right below our div, let's say another div with a class of width 5, 6, padding y is 10, and we have another div inside of it with a margin of auto, so m-auto. So I want the year that a car is founded, the name of the car, and I want a paragraph. So let's create that. Let's say span, founded, let's say 2020. The span has a class of uppercase. The text is text-blue-500. Font bold. Text is extra small and it's italic. Save it, go to Chrome. Let's actually wrap this inside the div with the margin auto as well. So let's copy this one. Let's paste it right here. Align it a little bit. So what do we need next? Well, right below our span, I want an h2 with the name Audi. It has a class of text-gray-700 and the text is 5XL. Chrome, refresh it. All right. Right below my h2, I want a paragraph. And let's create some lorem ipsum text. So let's write down lorem, hit tab. Let's give our paragraph a class, text-lg, text-gray-700. And right below our paragraph, let's create a hr, so a line with a class of mt4, margin top 4, margin bottom 8. Save it, refresh it, and let's actually create a little bit more spacing around our paragraph. So let's say py is 6. Alright, this looks good. Whenever you work with Eloquent, you want to interact with the database. So let's set up our database by creating our first migration. So let's go to the code editor. Let's open database, migrations, and it's the last one, create cars table. What I want to do is to change my ID to increments, and I want to give it a name of ID. Right below my ID, let's create a new table, which is a string with the name. I want the year when the car is founded, so let's say table, integer, founded. And I want the description, so table, long text, which is the description. Let's save it. But before we migrate our database, let's open the .env file. Let's check our database credentials. My host is localhost. My port is alright. We will create our database. Username is root, and my password is Dari1234. This is the data that I need for now. So let's go back to the command line because we need to go inside MySQL, and I already have it open. What we could do is to create a database. So create database cars. One row has been affected. And like before, don't close off MySQL because we need it later on as well. Let's go back to the other tab because now we're ready to migrate. Let's say PHP artisan migrate. And we have a connection issue, so I probably haven't saved my .env file. All right, let's run it again. Yes, and it has been migrated, as you can see. So what do we need to do next? Well, we need dummy data inside our database. So let's go back to MySQL. Let's create an insert query. So we want to insert into cars, the columns name, founded, and the description. And the values are, let's say, Audi. It's founded in 1909. And let's give it a description of this is the description for Audi. Let's close it off with a semicolon. Let's hit enter. And one row has been added. Let's change the second one to Mercedes. And the value of the name too. And Mercedes has been founded in 1926. And the last one is, let's say, BMW. BMW is found in 1916, and the name is BMW as well. All right, so that's desk cars again. All right, let's select everything from cars. I forgot from. All right, we have 3 rows right now that we could use. So my goal is to basically show you all Eloquent models in order to retrieve, update, delete, and insert data. But before we do that, let me show you a couple of things that we could add inside our model. So let's hop to our car model. Let's open it. If you took notice, we haven't defined anywhere inside our code that the car model needs to interact with the car table in our database. That's because the default behavior for table names in Laravel is snake cases, and it pluralizes your class name. There is obviously a way to manipulate this and to give it a different name. And to do that, we need to create a new property. So protected table, and we need to set it equal to a string, which will override the default table called cars. We don't need to do it. So what I want to do is to set it equal to cars, just as it is. We could also manipulate the primary key. So if we hop back to MySQL, and let's say desk cars, you can see that the ID is indeed the primary key of our table. So we can change that by basically creating a new property, so protected, called primary key, and we can set it equal to a new table. So we could say that our name is our primary key, which makes no sense, but we could do it. Now there might be a case where you just don't want your primary key. In that case, you can set the value of your primary key equal to false. But what I want to do is to just set it equal to ID, just as it is. So if we hop back to iTerm, you can see that we have a updated at and created at. Well, if you don't want to use it, you could create a new property called timestamps, and you just need to set it equal to false. But if you want to use it, so let's say true, you have the opportunity to customize the format. And that can be done by saying protected date format is equal to the same as the PHP date syntax. So let's say hours, minutes, seconds. And once again, these are all optional. You can either remove them right now or keep it. I will remove the date format because I don't want that. Now that we've talked about the model, we're ready to talk about how we could retrieve data with Eloquent. And you can see this as a select query in MySQL. So whenever you want to retrieve all blog posts and print them out, or you want to retrieve a user by checking the user's credentials, or what we're going to do is basically retrieving all cars that we have in our database and send it back to a view. This is something you will be doing most of the time. You want to pull data from your database using the static call on your Eloquent model. So how do we get started? Let's open our controller. Let me actually close off everything because we don't need it. Yeah, and we need our cars controller. Now the first thing that we need to do is to pull in our car model. So at the top of our screen, let's use app /models /car. So a single model. Now what's next? Well, we want to perform something like this, right? We want to basically say select everything from the table cars. In Eloquent, we can create a variable, let's say variable cars, and let's set it equal to the model that we have. In our case, it's car, followed by double colon, and we want to get everything. So we need to use a function called all. Before we continue, let's dump our variable cars to see what the output is. Let's save it, Google Chrome, refresh the browser, and we have an array. Let's open it, and we have all cars right here. Now let's hop back to the code editor. Honestly, it's not necessary to create a variable and set it equal to our Eloquent model. We could also pass the Eloquent model right into the view, but I think this looks a little bit cleaner than doing that. So what I want to do is to add a comma right after our index. We want to pass in an associative array, cars, pointer, variable cars. Let's get rid of the dd, and we don't need the select. The reason why I'm passing it in as an array is because I want to loop over it in our UI. So let's do that. Let's go to our views, so our index.blade. Let's actually copy the entire div with the margin auto. Let's remove it. Let's go right inside of the div. Let's create a for each loop. And let's for each over the cars that we have as a single car. So let's paste in whatever we just copied. All right, let me align it. And what I want to do is to replace 2020 with a variable car. And I want to pick out founded. And let's do the same thing for Audi. Let's say car, name. And for the paragraph as well. Variable car, I want to grab the description. Save it, go back to Chrome. Refresh it, and apparently our dump is still there, so let's actually save this file. And you can see that our Audi, Mercedes and BMW has been printed out. Obviously, there's also a way to filter through all cars. So as you can see, we have our variable cars, which is equal to all cars, but instead of saying all, let's get rid of it, and let's use the where method. So what do we want to achieve? We want to see if there is a value in the column name that's equal to, let's say, Audi. And then we want to get all cars. So let's go on the line below and let's say get. Let's save it. Let's hop to Chrome, refresh it, and only Audi has been printed out. Now this is how you get a specific value. Right now, we're writing down Audi right here. But let's say that a user wants to log in. Well, you can grab their ID and use it right here. Or whenever a user clicks on a specific product, your endpoint will change and you can use that specific endpoint right here. You may have noticed that everything that we're doing is basically the same as Laravel's query builder. And that is definitely true, but you could do a lot more stuff. So keep in mind that everything we did with the query builder on the DB facade is also possible with Eloquent objects. Now as you can see, we're using the get method right here, which is exactly the same as a normal query builder call. We're building a query and then we're calling the get method to get the results. Whenever you want to process a large amount of records, so actually not what we're doing right now, there might be a possibility that you run into memory or locking issues. And since Laravel is so great to use, There's a method which allows you to break your request into smaller pieces, so it will chunk it down. So on the line below, let's create a new variable cars, and let's set it equal to car, chunk. The first param is the amount of rows where you want to chunk. So let's say 2, comma, function, parentheses, curly braces. Inside our parentheses, let's pass in variable cars. And let's loop through all of our cars. So let's say cars as a single car. Print underscore R, that car. Save it, hop back to Chrome, refresh it. You won't see any difference right here. But the query has been split into multiple queries based on the number that we have passed in. Right now it's 2. So we have 4 rows in our database, then we're performing 2 queries of 2 rows. What we've done so far was printing out stuff that has been found. Now there might be a chance where there is no model found and you just want to throw an exception. For that, we could use the find or fail and first or fail method. It will retrieve the first result of the query. Let's get rid of our second cars variable. We do need our where method, but instead of saying get, let's just say first or fail. It will retrieve the first result of the query, and since we have set it equal to Audi, everything will be fine. So let's go to Chrome, and we're getting an error right now because we need to change something on our front end since we're retrieving only one single row. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, the index. Let's actually delete the variables that we have right above our div, and let's just print out variable cars. Let's save it, refresh the browser, and you can see that we have one single row where the name is equal to Audi. And we could also print out the name by saying pointer name, which is equal to Audi. But what if we change Audi inside our where clause to something that we don't have? So let's say Tesla. Save it, refresh the browser, and we're getting a 404 because it does not exist. There are a couple aggregates that we could use in Eloquent as well. So let's go on the line below and let's say print underscore R, the car, where the name is equal to Audi, and return the count. And cars with 1R, excuse me. And let's comment out this one. Refresh the browser, and you can see that the return value is 1 because we have one match. Instead of counting the match that we have, we could get rid of the where clause and say all. So we want the count of all the cars that we have. Refresh the browser, and the output is 3. We can print out the sum. So let's get rid of everything after the double colon. Let's say sum. And well, let's say the founded, which is an integer. And we need to add an extra set of parentheses. Save it, Chrome, refresh it, and the sum of 3 integers is 5,751. And we can print out the average. So let's say AVG instead of sum, refresh it, and the sum is 1917. Now that we're done with retrieving data, I want to show you how we could insert data. And this is where you will see a difference from normal query builders and Eloquent. So let's hop to the code editor. Let's get rid of the average. Let's undo our comment. Let's just return all cars. And now we're done with the index. So we can proceed with the create method. So inside the create method, let's return a view to cars.create. We basically need a form which will allow us to insert data into input fields. Click on the submit button and do something with it inside the store method. So what's next? Well, let's actually create our view. So inside our cars, let's create a new file, create.blade.php. Now let's write down cars. Let's actually drag our index inside cars as well. Let's move it. Let's change our index view to cars.index. And let's change the endpoint as well. So inside the web.php, let's change it to /cars. All right, save it. Let's hop to Google Chrome. Let's change the endpoint to /cars. All cars are printed out. Let's add a /create after it. And we have cars printed out on the screen. So what's next? What we want to do is to add a create button somewhere here. Let's say right here. First, we need to hop to our index page again. Let's scroll up and let's go right below our class margin auto with 80% and padding on the y-axis. Let's create a new div. Give it a class of padding top 10. Let's create an answer in here with the text add a new car, and I want a symbol of @var. Let's change the href to cars/create, and let's give our button a class. So let's say class is equal to border b2, padding bottom is 2, border dash dotted, italic, text dash gray dash 500. Save it, refresh the browser, and we have a button right here to add a new car. If we click on it, you can see that our endpoints change to cars/create. So what do we need to do in our create? Well, we could basically copy everything inside of our index and paste it right inside of the create. We don't need the car information, so let's get rid of that. And we don't need the button, but we just need the content. Alright, so inside the content, let's create a new div, which has a class of margin-auto. The width is again 80%, and the padding on the y-axis is 24. This is the div around everything. So let's create another one with a class text center, and in there I want an h1. Create car. The class is text 5XL uppercase bold. Save it. Refresh the page. Now let's create our form by saying div. The class is flex. Justify items in the center. Justify in the center. And the padding top is 20. Then we need a form because we need to submit it, and I'll come back later on the action and the method. Alright, we have a div in here which has a class of block. Type is equal to text. Let me actually outline this on the line below. The type, it has a class of block, shadow dash 5XL, margin bottom is 10, p-2, width is 80, italic, and I want to add a placeholder, but I want to style the placeholder. So placeholder dash gray dash 400. Let's give it a name of name, and let's give it a placeholder. So let's say brand name. Let's save it and test the output. Alright, this looks fine. Let's copy paste our input actually. So the second one has a type of text, the class is alright, the name is founded, and the placeholder is founded. We need one more because we have our description. The name is description as well. We need to submit it, so we need a button. So let's say button with a class of bg-green-500, block, shadow-5XL, margin bottom is 10, padding overall is 2, and the width 80, uppercase, and let's change the font to bold. And let's add a text of submit. We need to submit our button, so let's set the type equal to submit as well. Save it, let's test the output, and this looks alright, we don't need anything fancy. What's left here? Well, let's scroll up because we need to change some things inside of our form. Whenever your user fills in the form, the action is /cars. And we know that we're performing a post request. So let's say the method equal to post. If we fill in the form right now, so let's say Tesla 2000 test submit, it's not working. And this is related to cross-site request forgery. By default, all Laravel routes accept read-only routes. So the get, head, or options request. Now if we go right below our form, write down @CSRF, save it. Let's go back to Chrome, refresh the page, and let's inspect the page for a second. If we open our form, you can see that we have an input type hidden, the name is _token, and the value is a weird ID. This token is generated at the start of every session, and every non-read-only route compares the submitted token against the session token. So why do we do this? It's mostly used when one website pretends to be another. the goal is for someone to hijack your users' access to your website by submitting forms from their website to your site. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's go to our cards controller because we're ready to do something. So we're creating a form, but we want to store data. So we need to work in our store right now. And usually when I program, I always perform a DD to see if my form will be submitted or not. So let's say OK, save it, go back to Chrome, refresh the page, click on submit. Now let me close off my inspect element. And you can see that it actually works because OK has been printed out. There are two ways how we could insert a record. Let me remove my DD. The first one is by creating a new instance. So let's say variable car is equal to new car, what I just showed you. Then we could say that we have our car, but we want to specifically say that our name is equal to the request method right here. And from the request, we could grab HTTP information from input and then the name of our input field. So in our case, it's name. Let's do the same thing for the column founded and description. So car founded is equal to request. Look for input fields with the name of founded. Let's do the same thing for the description. Let's set that equal to request. Find an input field with the name of description. Let's save it. Let's go back to Google Chrome. Well, let's change the endpoint to cars. Let's add a new car. Let's say it's Tesla, founded in 2000, and the description is test. Let's submit the form. It actually works because we're not getting an error. So let's hop to iTerm. Let's say select all from cars. And well, something went wrong right here because Tesla has not been added inside our table. And the reason why this did not work out is because we need to save it. And that's not what we're actually doing. Let's say that we have our car instance and we want to perform the save method on it. So it will save the name, founded, and the description. Until you use this save method, the instance of car represents the car fully, but the data hasn't been saved. Before we test it out, let's actually return a redirect to /cars. Let's test it out. Let's go to Google Chrome, refresh the page, and you can see that Tesla has been printed out and inserted inside our database. Let's test it out on iTerm. Let's select everything from cars again, and you can see that Tesla has been added. All right. The second way is the way that I actually prefer to use, and that's by passing in an array to a model. So let's actually comment out everything that we just created. And let's create a new variable car, and let's set it equal to car, and let's call the create method. So what we need to do is to pass it in as an array, so brackets, and inside the brackets, we need to pass an associative array. So we basically need to do the same thing as we did before. Let's define our column name, so name, and let's set it equal to request. Grab everything from input with the name of name, comma, founded. Grab everything from the HTTP that's inside an input field with the name of founded. And let's do the same thing for the description. So request, it's input, description. This won't work right now because every time you want to pass an array to a new model, every property that we have right here needs to be approved for mass assignment in our model file. So what we need to do is to open our car model, and right below our primary key, we need to create a new property, so protected, fillable, and let's set it equal to an array where we need to say which items can be mass assigned, or columns, excuse me. So let's say the column name, founded, description. Let's save it. Let's hop back to Google Chrome. Let's create a new car. Let's say Volkswagen. I don't know when it is found. And the description is Volkswagen as well. Let's submit it. Scroll down. And Volkswagen has been added inside our database. I need to mention one more thing. In our cars controller, we could use make instead of create as well. But I prefer to use create because it will save the instance to the database as soon as it's called. So we don't need to add the variable car save method. And whenever you use make, you actually do need to use it. So that's why I prefer to use create. This was easy, wasn't it? Well, updating records are pretty similar. You can get a specific instance, change its properties, and then save it. Or you could pass in an array of updated properties. So right here, we're going to work with the edit and the update page. We're going to work with the edit and update method. So same thing as before. Let's return a view in the edit form. Let's return a view for the edit form. So return a view called cars.create. Let's create it. So in our cars folder, create a new file, edit.plate.php. And we could basically copy paste our entire create file. And the only difference is that we just want to add values in our input. So let's copy it. Let's go to the edit page, paste it right there. But before we start editing something in our edit page, let's quickly add an answer on every item that comes from the database in order to show the page. So let's go to our index, right inside our for each loop, and below our margin auto div, let's create a new div. Let's give it a class of float to the right. And let's create an answer in here. Endpoint to cars / and we want to edit a specific post. So we need to grab the ID that we have from our car that we're printing out. So let's say car ID / edit. And just to make sure that our URL is good, let's go to iTerm. Let me open a new tab. Now let me say PHP artisan route list. Now let's search for the edit action, which is right here. And you can see that it has cars / car, so the ID / edit. All right, let's add text first of edit, and let's say var again. Let's give it a class of, well, we could actually copy the class that we have right here. Let's paste it in, but let's change the text gray to text green. Save it. Let's go to Google Chrome, refresh it, and you can see that every item has an edit button. Let's click on it. And you can see that the endpoint is good, so we need to work on our form. So let's do that. Let's go to Visual Studio Code, edit page. Let's scroll up. Let's say update the car. And since we want to edit a specific row in our database, we need to pass in that row to our views. So let's hop to the controller again. What we could do is to say dd variable ID, refresh it, and the ID is 1, which is right. So based on that ID, we could basically say we have variable car, let's set it equal to car, and find me a car with that specific ID. Let's dd car again, save it, refresh the browser. Now let's open attributes, and we have a car with ID number 1. The problem that we face right now is that the find method will return a collection, so we need to loop over it. And if we add the first method to it at the end, so first, we will return an object, so we don't need to loop over it in our UI. Let me get rid of the dump, and let's return it to the view. And we don't want to pass it in as an array, like I just said. So let's say with cars as car. Well, let's say car as car. Let's actually replace our view with edit. Let's save it. Let's go to Chrome. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's click on edit, and we're on our update. And you can see that Audi has been printed out. Let's do the same thing for the founded. Let's say value is car founded, and for the description as well. So let's say value variable car founded. All right, let's have a look at our endpoint because it's cars / update right now. Let's hop to iTerm, and as you can see, it should be cars / the ID. So let's change that. Let's set it equal to cars. Let's remove update / car ID. Let's save it. Let's test it out in the output. All right, let's refresh it. You can see Audi, the value over founded, and the description. So let's hop to VS Code because we're ready to perform our update method right now. And we're basically going to follow the same approach. So what we did in our edit was finding a car, and we sent that back to the view. So what we need to do right now is to basically go up, copy the create method that we have, scroll down, paste it right inside of our update, and we need to change a couple things right here. We don't want to create, but we want to update a car. But in order to update a car, we need to do something with this specific ID that we have. So the current post. Let's go right after our model. Let's say where, pointer. Let's go on the line below. And in our where clause, let's see where the ID is equal to the current ID that we have right here. All right. Are we done? Well, no. Let's return the view as well. So the redirect. All right. Let's save it. We're trying to update something, right? And that isn't possible with a post request, as you could see right here. Our method is equal to post. And in order to fix this in Laravel, we need to perform a put request, which our CSRF token will understand. So let's save everything. Let's go to Chrome. Let's change the name to Audi2 and let's submit it. Something is going wrong right now with our token, right? Or with our method. And if you're familiar with HTML and PHP, you know that it's only possible to submit a GET or a POST request. So how do we fix this? We could keep our method equal to POST and we could go right below our token and say add method. And we basically want to transform our POST request to a PUT request. And that's how you use Eloquent's update model. Save it. Let's go back to Google Chrome. Well, let's go back to our cars. Let's click on edit. Change Audi to Audi2. Submit it. And you can see that our name has been changed to Audi2. Now there's one more request left. And that's the delete method that we have right below our, let's see, update method. And once again, deleting is very similar to updating with Eloquent. So first, we need to create a form in our index.blade.php. Let's say right below our edit. And it can't be an answer because we need the request. And that's not possible when you create an answer. So inside our form, let's create our CSRF token again. Our action is to /cars/ the specific car ID. Let's save it and let's go to iTerm. As you could see right here, destroying has a URI of cars / the ID. The method is equal to post. Let me close it off actually. All right. And right below our CSRF token, we need to create a method where we want to delete. So inside our form, I want a button where the type is equal to submit. And let's actually copy the entire class that we have of our answer above. Let's paste it right inside of our button. And instead of saying green, let's say red. And let the text be delete. Delete with the same icon that we have. Save it. Let's hop to Google Chrome, refresh the page, and we have a delete button right here. But let's add a little bit padding in our form. So let's say class is equal to pt3. Save it, refresh it, and this looks all right. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. We already have our ID passed in right here. So let's test it out. Let's say dd, that specific ID. Save it, Google Chrome, refresh the page. Let's click on delete. And the ID is 1, which is equal to the URI. Let's go back. Since we already have the ID inside our method, we could go up to our edit, copy the find method, place it right inside of our destroy. So we want to find where that specific ID exists. And we don't need to do the same thing as we did before with our create or update. We only need to say car, delete that specific row. Let's return a redirect to /cars. Save it, go to Chrome, refresh the page, let's click on delete, and you can see that it has been deleted. Let's delete them all. And you can see that this works fine. But to be honest, this is not the way that I prefer. What I usually like to do is to pass my model right inside of my method. So let's get rid of ID. Let's say our model car, variable car. And if we do this, we don't need to pass in the ID since it's already passed in inside our action. So let's get rid of this line. We do need our car delete because we can do it instantly. And this is how you save yourself an extra line of code. There's no reason to look up an instance just to delete it. But this is a thing that I will show you later on as we proceed with the course. I didn't change it at first because I thought it was just as easy to keep the resource list. And we can do the same thing for other methods as well. Like I said, that's not for now. If you do like my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up. And if you're new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button.